Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our weekly DSS break. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're here live every Thursday to talk about data science experiences and best practices with leading data professionals in a 15-minute break. I'm Anna Annison, CEO and founder of Formulated by the home of Data Science Salon, and I'm streaming from our headquarters located here in the heart of Miami, right next to the design district. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Egor Gryaznov, a co-founder and CTO at Bigeye, and previously a staff engineer at Uber. Egor is a rock star making big data work and building amazing data operations platforms. And today he's going to share some valuable data engineering concepts and best practices for data scientists. Thank you so much for joining us here for DSS Break episode, Egor.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Anna.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background before I jump right into the questions, because I have some really good questions for you.
I'd be happy to. So I'm Egor. I am the co-founder and CTO here at Bigeye. We are a data observability platform helping teams make sure that their data is reliable and fit for use before they get surprised by bad data in any of their data products, like their dashboards or machine learning models. Before Bigeye, I was at Uber for 4.5 years. I was one of the first people called a data engineer there. I did a little bit of everything from data infrastructure. We set up Vertica as the first data warehouse there, built all the ETL tooling, migrated the dashboards, did some data modeling, BI, and then I spent about 2 years building custom analytics applications, primarily around the A/B testing framework at Uber. And I started Bigeye as a way to take a lot of what I learned about scaling a data platform at Uber and bring it to a broader audience. Talking to people in the industry, we realized that everyone sort of faces the same problems and reinvents the wheel on a lot of them. And we wanted to build the sorts of tools and solutions that we wish we had 5-6 years ago when we were really just getting started and having to scale out the data team internally.
Cool. No, thanks for sharing that. So, I mean, you're coming with this great experience to actually provide a great product for solving this problem. And you have over 10 years of experience in data engineering. And from your point of view, what's the most exciting part of making big data work?
The most exciting part for me is seeing data being used for business purposes. And really, this is where why data science has really become such a major track in the data industry, is because now with infrastructure becoming easier, ETL becoming easier, there's a lot of tooling around getting your data in one place and being able to do something interesting with it. And really, the do something interesting part with it is what's important to the business. It's not about using the tools and using the frameworks in order to move your data or transform it anyway. It's about what are you doing with it afterwards. And
Right.
the most exciting part for me is, based on the data that we have, sometimes even the smallest amounts of data and something that seems like the least interesting data can lead to major changes in the business. And this is what's really exciting for me. A good example here is when I worked at Uber, we had data around drivers going online and offline. And that data seems pretty straightforward. Driver goes online, driver goes offline, and there's some window there. But there was a whole team built around that in order to use that data in order to figure out what are the right incentives to pay out to drivers, and how do we encourage drivers to take breaks, and which drivers are more likely to stay on the road for too long, and how do we detect those kinds of patterns and encourage better behaviors in our drivers that will lead to less accidents and more and better experiences for both drivers and riders. And the data set itself wasn't large. It was nowhere near the largest data set at Uber. We could reprocess the whole thing in one go if we really wanted to, but it led to so many interesting business innovations. And that sort of work is really what excites me about the data space, is that as we have access to more and more data sets, we're going to be coming up with more and more interesting uses for them and be able to do something really innovative for a lot of different industries.
Cool. No, that's really interesting. Yeah, because I do agree. It's more about that really solving those problems and finding solutions through that data. What are some of the main challenges that data engineers face that data scientists might not worry about?
Oh, that's a great question. So for a little bit of context, when I met my co-founder Kyle at Uber, I know Kyle was on this show a little while ago as well. Uh, so Kyle was a data scientist working on the experimentation platform at the time. So he was doing all the statistical models behind how do we analyze experiments, A/B tests, and like when is one variant actually statistically significant, and we should roll it out. And he was the genius behind all of the stats behind it. And I was his data engineering counterpart, and I was the one who was helping put together the pipelines and making them more generic, and how do we scale out his work and being able to make sure that it's reliable and stays up and that the dashboard gets fed. And so a lot of that reliability behind the scenes is something that almost always falls on the shoulders of data engineering teams, and the business often just takes that for granted, where they say, I expect my data to be correct. When you, as a data scientist, you go in and you look at a data set, you just expect it to be fresh and correct and complete. And when it's not, then you're like, oh no, this is actually a problem. Let me go escalate it to the rest of the data team. And I think the tooling and the processes and the interesting frameworks that data engineering teams build in order to ensure the reliability and stability of the pipelines and the data and the infrastructure that they provide to the rest of the organization, that's really the kind of struggles that go unseen. And really, at a lot of companies, data engineering teams turn into infrastructure, almost close to infrastructure teams, where they provide a service to the rest of the business. And that service is having data infrastructure that works and is up and is reliable. And so that I think is the biggest sort of hidden expectation of data engineering teams today.
Right. And it sounds like you really have to be together as a team.
Yeah.
And to work together to do this and do it successfully, right? So
yeah. Because a lot of times the biggest problem is data engineering teams often don't know what the business expectations are. So you have this massive proliferation of different kinds of data and volumes of data that we haven't seen before. When I was doing data engineering at Uber, before that at One Kings Lane, I knew every single table. I knew what it meant. I knew what data it had. I knew where it was coming from, because there was an order of 50 tables that really, really mattered, and there's a bunch of plate data. Now you have companies where, even at Bigeye today, we are a very small company relative in terms of headcount, but we have a lot of different data being ingested from everything and everywhere. And if I were a data engineer here, I would be one data engineer trying to manage the same volume of data and heterogeneity of data that I would be at a company 3 times, 4 times the size 5 years ago. And so because of that, it's important for the data science team and really the business side of the house, data science, analytics, product managers, being on the same page with the data team in order to make sure that the data team knows what's important to us, why is it important, what should it look like, and be able to communicate efficiently. And same goes in reverse. The data engineering team should be able to communicate efficiently back to the business and tell them, you want this data every 5 minutes. What are you doing with it? That's a big strain on the infrastructure, and it's going to cost us an extra $5,000 a month to give you that. But if you want it every hour, then that doesn't cost us anything. Is that still acceptable for you as a business? And that channel line of communication needs to stay open, and it can't be one-sided.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like communication is super important. But let's take it back a notch. And what about those companies that have one data scientist and they don't have that engineering support? What data engineering best practices can data scientists implement in their jobs to be more successful? Because there are a lot of those smaller companies, they just don't have data engineering yet. They hire their first data scientist. So how can they be successful?
I mean, Bigeye is a great example of this. Our data scientist was our third hire, and we still don't have a data engineer. Our whole engineering team plus data science team sort of like works as a joint data engineering team. The most important thing is really reproducibility, and that comes down to both the data, the code, the pipelines, and the documentation. So at some point, you as a solo data scientist, maybe a team of 2 data scientists, you will have to pass off a lot of that work to a data engineering team when that gets staffed up. And in order for you to do that efficiently, it needs to be well understood. It needs to be reproducible. You need to be able to take your existing pipelines and say, this is how they work, and this is how they scale up, and this is where they work, where we struggle with them, so that somebody else doesn't have to sort of like look at it from fresh eyes and have to relearn all of the problems that you already know. And this is something that data engineering teams do very well because they build frameworks around this. A lot of times data engineering teams will say, great, all of our pipelines need to fit into this framework. And they'll use, for example, Airflow for orchestration, and they'll have a very custom Airflow pipeline that says all ETL jobs need to implement this framework. Maybe it's DBT. DBT is a popular option today. Everything has to be in DBT, which then limits the scope of like surprises that they can encounter. Right. When you're sort of a solo data scientist, even a solo analyst, your main job is solve the problems for the business. You're going to have a different problem every single day, and you won't always think about it in terms of framework because you're just trying to move things along and forward for the business. And so making sure you're documenting your things and they're all reproducible and everyone knows where they are, so that then when someone does come along whose charter it is to turn this into stable production, reproducible framework style pipelines, they can then easily take that and start converting it rather than having to reverse engineer what you've already done.
Right. And speaking about tools, you mentioned DBT. What about some other tools that you like to keep data fresh, accurate, and reliable that you would suggest?
I mean, can I plug Bigeye? I feel like this is
I feel like you built a Bigeye exactly to solve that problem. Right.
This is exactly why we built Bigeye. When we started the company in 2019, there really wasn't anything off the shelf for something like that. Most teams just built something in-house, and they wrote little hacky Python scripts that would generate some like row count checks or do something. And it was interesting because when we talked to people, everyone sort of reinvented the wheel. The same kind of hacky scripts with the same kind of inputs were, we saw them at company after company. Now, today, there's actually a whole proliferation of tools. Bigeye is a great example. A DBT has a whole module around testing. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of, I really wish that they would build more things into the framework itself, but they have a very extensible add-on for custom testing that we've seen our customers use. In terms of something that's a little bit more accessible and focused on testing, Great Expectations I have done a great job of building a library that helps you express all of these expectations around your pipeline. They operate a little bit differently where they are in pipeline, whereas Bigeye is once the data is landed, we can monitor it and make sure that it looks correct on through the trends historically, whereas Great Expectations is focused around, here are things that have to be held true about this data set before I even write it out. And that is very useful when you have strict business requirements that need to be upheld. For example, if you are writing into a table that's going to send out emails to a marketing list, there better be emails in the email column. And if there are any nulls, then that sounds like there's bad data upstream, and we should definitely not do that because that might crash the system downstream. And so having a very hard business expectation around your data, if you can define that, then Great Expectations is a very great framework to use to do that.
Cool. I like the name too. Great. That's a nice name. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I know that Bigeye is going to be hosting the second edition of the Data Reliability Engineering Conference, or DRACON, virtually on May 25th and 26th. What can the audience expect from that event?
So DRACON is going to be a great overview about what leaders in the industry are doing in order to ensure reliability in their data processes. And data reliability engineering focuses around the 7 principles from site reliability engineering from SRE and applies them to the data space. And what we're going to hear is about leaders in the industry, both practitioners as well as executives and managers and even vendors around what is the industry doing in order to make sure that their data can be as reliable as possible, releases that you understand how things change, when things go out, what are the best practices for telling your team that something is broken, and how do you communicate that. And there's going to be a lot of great talks. Also, Bigeye is going to, I personally am hosting a workshop at DrayCon where I will show you how to build a very basic data observability platform on top of Snowflake in under 2 hours. So that's going to be an exciting little hands-on workshop that I would definitely encourage everyone to attend. So there's going to be a lot of really good material that you can then take something away and bring it back to your team in order to up-level your team's best practices around data reliability. And I know that this is, you might say, oh, well, you're hosting it, so of course you're going to say that this is going to be a great workshop. Last time we ran DrayCon in last year, end of last year when we had the first DrayCon, I actually got texts from a couple of my former colleagues who attended DrayCon and said, this was great, really enjoyed talk X, Y, and Z by somebody, and I took notes and I brought that back to my team because we realized that we are facing the same sorts of problems, and we learned something that we can apply in our team in order to be more efficient. And so it was great to hear somebody actually take something away from it and bring it back to their team, and they found a lot of the talks useful. So this year, this time around, I think it's going to be more of the same.
Cool. Yeah, no, that sounds like a great workshop, especially if you really could do that under 2 hours. I think people will definitely take some value from that so they could actually do that themselves. So thank you for hosting. I'm looking forward to that. Also looking forward to DrayCon. We're going to share the website, and you can also look at the 7 principles there as well if you guys are interested to see more details on the conversation that's going to be happening. So thank you so much for joining us today, Egor, and it was really great to chat with you. And you can join us next at DrayCon May 25th and 26th, and registration is free. Thank you to Bigeye, and make sure to sign up through the link there. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of the week and weekend. And thanks again, Egor. It was really a pleasure.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Anna.
All right. Bye, guys.